we are going to continue with this work today, and we have agreed last week that it is on research questions and hypotheses. I must say to you just from the beginning that this is a very difficult topic for me, but I tried to tackle it, and as always, what I do is to actually choose the simplest form of explaining, and I run away from difficult concepts. And you will note that some of the slides pertain to quantitative research. So quantitative research is one of that subject that I don't master, but I enjoy it, and you will see how we navigate today. And today we're going to focus on qualitative research questions, quantitative research questions, hypothesis, mixed methods research questions and hypothesis, the definitions and relationships of research questions and hypothesis. I've put in the email there today here, so that if there are questions to be asked, they can be asked via the emails and even the documents, whether it is a proposal or any of the chapters of the research reports. Those can be bounced with me, and I always comment and send them back to you. And as always, when there are still questions on the comments, we again convene and discuss them to find a way forward. The other thing is that I always say that I select concepts for discussions, but the topics, I don't deviate from the heading or from the topic. I actually go and look for literature and some information that can better assist me in making presentations on the specific topic. And what I do is actually to stimulate discussions, and I have got room that every one of us can go and do literature search. And I do hope that even before you can come here, you might have read something about the research questions and the hypothesis. And if you remember, the other day we did touch on the hypothesis, and we were asking what is an independent one, what is a dependent one. We did touch on that. So today we will continue with that discussion, and you are even encouraged to engage with the discussion and share your insight. Some of you might understand some of the concepts in your own right, or some of concepts you might understand them better than I do, depending on the background. If you have conducted studies before, then you are not limited to listening to me or to agreeing with me. If we differ, let us differ. When we agree, it's fine. And I always maintain, if you are going to use your perspective in writing your proposal or finalizing the report writing, you must always be able to defend decisions that you take. And the best way of doing so is to study literature. And if everything is based on scientific literature, no one is going to shoot you down. But arbitrary arguments and assertion of statements that do not have basis are not acceptable in science. Investigators place science spots to carry the reader through a plan for a study. And here it is indicated to us that the first science spot is the purpose statement, which we dealt with last week on Thursday, which establishes the central intent for the study. So the next would be the research questions or hypotheses that narrow the purpose statement to predictions about what will be learned or questions to be answered in the study. And in the example that I presented last week, I did present a research question because I was trying to indicate a linkage between the purpose statement and the research question, particularly the central research question. But if you still remember, I said that my purpose statement was derived from a research question. In other words, I did not start by the purpose statement. I started by a research question. This is opposed to what Creswell and Creswell 2018 are saying. Here, they are saying you start by a statement, the purpose statement, and which will then is followed by the research question. But what I think maybe what they might be meaning here, they might be making reference to research questions. If they refer to research questions, then they are referring to sub questions. They're not referring to a central one. But if they refer to one, then they refer to a central one. So I'm saying the central question was posed before the statement of from the paper, before the purpose statement. And the purpose statement followed the research question. But below the research questions and below the statement of problem, there was these specific research questions. So today, we will still come to the research questions and the sub questions, the logic on the development of those, and how they relate to the studies. But as we go on, as we continue, we then are going to touch on the hypothesis. And the first one that we're going to focus on today are the research questions, and the qualitative ones in particular. In qualitative study, inquirers state research questions, not objectives, not specific goals for the research, or not hypotheses, which are predictions that involve variables and statistical tests. These research questions assume two forms. There is a central question, and we've already said that, and this is what I presented last week. Even the associated sub-questions I might have presented last week. So here we are told that in qualitative research, you don't necessarily need research objectives or research goals. And I think everywhere and every time while I was making a presentation, I presented research objectives that belonged to the qualitative study. And the reason that why I did that, I also noted that from the study that I completed, the qualitative study one, research one, it does not have research objectives. It only has research questions. And at the time of finalizing the research report, I still remember when I spoke to the study supervisor that the document does not have research objectives. We have lost research objectives because all along, during the course of developing the research project or executing the research project, objectives were there, and we worked along with them until the final stages of the research project. And surprisingly, when we finalized it, and I said, no, the final report does not have these research objectives. Then he said, don't worry about them, leave them outside. And I felt worried until yesterday, when I realized that actually in qualitative studies, we do not need them. So it's not a gap that exists in that research report, because in the Word document, sorry, in the hard copy that I have, I do not have research objectives, but I do have the central research question and the associated sub-questions. So I do not have hypothesis because the studies was qualitative, and in that one, I did not develop hypothesis. So there are guidelines here on how qualitative research questions are generated or how we need to use them. Ask one. It is said that we need to ask one or two central research questions. The central question is a broad question that asks for an exploration of central phenomenon or concept in a study. And today I've been very analytical because I was trying to look at how the specific research questions were worded. And I wanted to see if indeed the central research question did ask for an exploration of the central phenomenon. That is the exploration of organizational design of catchment management agencies. Now, later on, I want to argue with you, and I want you to make your inputs on how it has been phrased. So we would analyze it to see if indeed it complies with the guidelines provided by Creswell and Creswell. The inquirer further poses this question consistent with the imaging methodology of qualitative research as a general issue so as to not limit the views of participants. And I was trying to ensure that I also cut portion of the research method so that we can look at it and see if indeed it is in sync with the research question, because it is said that the posing of that question should be consistent with the imaging methodology. In other words, the methodology that has been used in the respective qualitative study. I did look at it and I did not even capture it, but I will ask for your permission to go and open so we can zoom and look at how the methods or the methodology was described and which one was selected for purposes of conducting the study under question here. To arrive at this question, you need to ask, what is the broadest question that I can ask in the study? So in other words, you need a very broad question. The question should not be specific, because here we're talking about a central question or an overall or general question for the study. And from that very question, all the other small questions will emanate. So if it is too specific, then it's not going to cater for all the sub questions. But if it is generic and not specific, then it caters and it will capture the specific questions, because the specific questions, as we have said, must give effect to the general or the central question. Now, beginning researchers trained in quantitative research might struggle with this approach because they are accustomed to reverse thinking. And in reverse thinking, in hypotheses, you will be able to see that hypotheses are always specific. They are not as generic as the research questions. So here they are indicating that some people might encounter challenges. Now, the central research questions, they narrow, actually hypotheses narrow the quantitative study to specific narrow questions or hypotheses based on a few variables. But in qualitative research, this is different. The intent is to explore the general complex set of factors surrounding the central phenomenon and to present the broad, varied perspectives or meanings that participants hold. Now, you will see now that they argue that if the question is narrow or if the general question is specific, it would limit the extent to which the participants can explore their experiences and report and give. As a result, you would find that the researcher would struggle to collect data. So data would not be rich because the manner in which the question would have been asked would be very narrow and it will be a limited one. Later on, we'll talk about open-ended questions because those provide a wider scope of exploration, presentation, and discussion of the experiences of the participants. So now here are the guidelines that are following now. No, I'm not going to look at the guidelines now, but what I'm going to do is to try and indicate that the qualitative study on organizational design is the one that we're going to look at. But the slides that is here is a confirmation that indeed the table of contents did not contain the research objectives. And if you look at 1.3, we've got specific research questions. And we do not have objectives until we come to the leading theoretical statements. the research methodology, when we go to the research methods or methodology, we already have passed the section where we need to address research objectives. Therefore, it is true that in our report, we only had specific research questions and the general research questions. All of them will be presented and we'll be able to learn from them. And this is the central research question that was asked. And we will now want to see if indeed it complies with the recommendations. Remember, I said that the guidelines from Creswell and Creswell is that it should indicate that it is going to allow exploration of the phenomenon under investigation. So we would look at it, try and scrutinize and see if indeed this one uses words that are exploratory in nature, that direct us to exploring through these studies. Now, the central research question is general and is broad. It's read like this. With the discussion so far at hand, the following general research question can be asked. Can an analysis and implementation of the principles of organizational studies and organizational design assist CMAs and their CEOs to manage their respective water management areas more effectively so that a better service can be rendered to water users? You will remember this question. I might be repeating it for the 5th or for the 7th time, but you see, this would make it easier and simpler for us to engage because we actually depart from the same slate and we then are discussing about the same concept, which we present from time to time. Now, they are saying there should be one central research question, which is generic, but you move on where they advise that even when you ask sub-questions, they propose even the number. They say you ask no more than 5 to 7 sub-questions in addition to your central questions. In other words, these sub-questions are going to give effect to the central research question. There was somebody who, at one stage, I think it was that other week, who was asking about the number of objectives that one can identify or generate for a specific study. And I referred the person to delimitations, and I referred the person to the scope of the research. And now here they are saying, in terms of the research questions, sorry, the sub questions are 5 to 7. And I was saying in the past that I always, when I generate specific objectives, I use research questions and I turn them around and they give me specific research objectives. So although in my case, my research objectives became redundant, but the research questions are still valid. So these ones, if they are the ones that are going to determine the number of chapters that the research report would have, then it means they should not even be more than 7. But you see, the extent to which you develop chapters should not only be limited to your research objectives or to our research questions. We can still continue to discuss about this in later. But here we are advised the number of questions, sub-questions that must come following the general question should not be more than 5 or 7. Several sub-questions follow each general central question, and these narrow the focus of the study, but they leave open the questioning. In other words, one of each of the sub-question direct you to do a specific investigation, because if you are answering the question, for an example, if you answer it by turning it into an objective, you will note that later on they're going to tell us that those research questions are answered when we are executing the study. And in all the stages of our research project, we are actually answering the research questions. And if it is quantitative research, it means we would be actually giving effect to the research objectives, and we will then also be informed by the hypothesis. that would have been generated or have been identified. So all these research questions would be answered as we go along. That is why it is said that they narrow the focus of the study, but they leave open the questioning. So the questioning is still allowed because they are not dictative. They don't tell you that you must only focus on a specific. In the way, that is why they recommend that their wording should be open-ended in a way that they allow exploration of the emergence of imaging issues in the research project. The sub questions in turn become specific questions. There they are, which are used during the interviews or observing or when looking at documents. And I've argued here that I did not agree with these guidelines because I looked at my research questions, that the specific research questions were not exactly as these sub questions. They were different because I also had too many specific research questions that were used in the interview guide in one of these projects while I was collecting data. So I would demonstrate that one. I'll be able to show how those questions were generated and how they don't, although they give effect to the general research question, they are not specifically those that I generated at the beginning of the study. In developing an interview protocol or an interview guide, the researcher might ask an icebreaker question at the beginning, for an example, followed by 5 or so sub-questions in the study. Now, I think I've asked more than 5 questions. That is why I did not comply specifically to the 5 or 4 that I had at the beginning of the study. The interview would then end with an additional wrap-up or summary question, or by asking who should I turn to learn more about this topic. And I just want to show you that these questions do narrow the focus of the study and that they do leave room for explanation. We are going to look at that. And I want you to look at this slide with me, because these are the specific research questions that I developed after the general question. And let's take in mind that we were told that they must they narrow. We want to see if indeed they do narrow the focus of the study, and we want to see if they indeed leave room for questioning. We also want to see if the questioning is exploratory, as stated above in earlier slides. Okay. Let's just look at the first sub question here and see if indeed it narrows the study. On which theoretical principles is the phenomenon organizational design founded within the context of organizational studies? Now, you will remember that we were told that our generic question should be broad. It should be indeed generic in nature, that it covers a wide spectrum. But under it, you are given specific questions that should focus on specific area in order to narrow the studies. Now, the first one, I say, only focuses on principles of organizational design. In other words, it says, okay, now in this study, now it will assist the researcher to indeed analyze the principles of organizational design, which are derived from the theory. Therefore, we expect that this is not what other sub-questions should repeat or should address, or this should not be addressing something that other sub-questions are going to address below. And then let's go to the second one. It says, what is the history of the establishment of the CMAs in South Africa, and which legislation lay the foundation of water management? Now, this one focuses on the history of CMAs and legislation. Now, it's no longer looking at the organizational or the principles of organizational design. Those are belonging to another sub question. And earlier on, I think last week, I did indicate that this very specific objective was given effect under literature review, because objective because a question, sub-question number 1, led to chapter 3, which specifically focused on the theoretical framework. And there I unpacked the theory of organizational design. The same applies to sub-question number 2. This one has led to chapter 2 that has discussed the history of the establishment of Catchment Management Agency and the legislation on water and the CMA process. So you could see that the two actually operationalize the general question by narrowing it and zooming on specific aspects, which is generically covered by the generic question. But number 3, what is the current situation of the CMA and their CEOs in South Africa, with the focus on the Nkomati, Usuthu, and Brede Horit CMAs? Now here, this one tells us we mustn't go to the history. Let's focus on the current. In other words, we expect that somewhere in the literature review, somewhere it can either be in chapter 2 or chapter 3, that there should be something that has to do with the present status of the establishment of catchment management agencies, as well as their organizational design. So we've got the current, we've got the history, and we also have the principle of organizational design. And last, and I think this is just the 4, we still have we might be having even the 5th question, which I did not bring in here. But let's just go to the 4th question, sub-question. It says, how can the organizational structure of CMAs be redesigned based on theoretical principles and the findings of the empirical study to assist CEOs to manage their organizations more effectively? And this one focuses on the future. The future means we shall have collected data, we shall have read the literature, then we shall have made sense on it, because we shall interpret the implication and the meaning on organizational design. So we are saying, with that knowledge, added onto us, how can we assist in the redesigning of the organizational structures of the CMAs so that the future of these institutions differ from what the history is telling us? History will be telling us there are challenges or they are in good status. But should we then find that the status differs with what the empirical research tells us, then it means there is room for change, and the room for change comes through recommendations. And we can make specific recommendations to indicate the future of the CMS, how in future they should be designed, and how we think we can recommend they should they should implement or execute their functions. And I just want to stop here so that while this slide is here, you can either refer to this slide or to earlier slides where I was talking about the research question, how we should do it, and the specific research questions that give effect to the general question. And I'm going to open here for comments. And I wish not to exit so that when there are questions, I can move around the slides around so we can make specific reference to what we've seen and make specific comments. First, we can start commenting on the slide that is on the board now. And we said it should narrow, and that it should leave a room open for questioning. Let's see if it complies with this criteria or it does not. Then we can have a good discussion on how we think it is important to comply, or is it okay if we deviate? Then we can substantiate our own reasons.
Thank you so much for clarifying the issue of the research questions, because I can now see how does it tally with the objectives. It's just that I'm still confused in terms of which ones can you use. Should you use the objectives or the research questions? But I do see the link where, in the case of the objectives, the central question will be your main aim, and then you will have the objectives underneath, which are very similar to the research questions. The only thing is that the objectives are having those verbs that are stating them or crafting them in a form of objectives, whereas the questions are just questions as they are. But I see a lot of similarity between the two. It's just that I will need to clarify with my supervisor whether does she require the objectives or the research questions. But there is a very good link between the two. And thank you so much for clarifying this.
Okay, thank you very much. The Creswell and Creswell believe that objectives and hypotheses belong to quantitative studies, and they believe that in qualitative studies you can do well with the general research question and its sub questions. I did not believe on that in the past. I'm just being transformed from yesterday. You know, I always would advise people, if they want to generate good research objectives, they should start with research questions. Then they can turn the research questions into objectives. Now, even if I don't totally throw away the objectives, I think I will continue to use research questions to generate research objectives where it is necessary. But if the study leader says we should not include objectives, then I will put them aside but continue with research questions. But where it is necessary and they need research objectives, then I will continue with the research objectives. I don't know. I forgot if I read under quantitative, if they say research questions are not necessary, you need a hypothesis or you only need objectives. And I think somewhere in the slide, I just said that we don't need objectives, we don't need a hypothesis, but we need research questions and the general one. So it's important to always ask the study leader so you can get their understanding.
Dr. Korombi, with regards to, or maybe not like us, maybe ask you if you can expand with regards to purpose statement, central questions, obviously aims and objectives. If you can just maybe summarize it, their interconnectedness. Thank you.
Okay. To me, I used the logic of a general research question in the development of the purpose statement. And today, when I was reading, I found that Creswell and Creswell think that you can start with the purpose statement and the research question can follow. And in some of the studies, I did not have research questions. I think it is only in one studies that I had a general research question and where I had research questions. In another one, I know that I only use sub problems because I identified the main problem as part of as if it is equivalent to a purpose statement. Then I came with the sub problems, and the study leaders did not have a problem with that one. But in the study here, which is an example, I had this research question and then turned it around. Then I got the purpose statement. But the other thing that is very important is that when you have your research question, you need something to operationalize it. How do you give effect to something that is very generic? And how do you use something that is very generic in executing the study? Then you need to operationalize it by actually crafting sub questions. Sub questions are very specific. That is why if you turn them around, they give you matching orders in a form of research objectives. And that is what I used to enjoy all the time. But now here, we hear somehow from Creswell and Creswell that when you have got in qualitative studies, you can just have your research questions. And therefore, I would say, in order to give effect to the central research question, you develop sub questions. Now, if my central research question is equivalent to my purpose statement, then in other words, my sub research questions are equivalent to my specific objectives. That is the link that I can make. And I think yesterday, I think when on Friday, or sorry, on Thursday, I might have presented a slide that says the purpose statement should have research questions. You see? So I thought the person from who I got that information might be departing from a qualitative approach, in that in qualitative research, even if you don't have research objectives, it's fine. You can do well with research questions. So that is the link that I see between the purpose statement, the research questions, the central research questions, and the research objectives. But to me, always my research objectives followed my purpose statement, and my sub questions always followed central research question. Now here, I sometimes stated that there was misalignment with what Creswell and Creswell are saying, with what I've done, because I noted that they argue that the sub questions that support the central research question will be used as they are in the collection of data. And the reason why you see the slide that is in front of us now here is that I went back to go and see and check which specific questions were asked when I was collecting data. And I noted that they are actually at tangent. They relate to sub questions, but they're not specifically those. They might be sub to those research questions, because the majority of them were based on the principles of organizational design. And in other words, it was literature review that informed me of what to ask. And this is precisely because I was giving effect to another theory. There was I had a theoretical framework, I had a leading theoretical argument. And there, in order to give effect to that theory, then I had to implement the principles. And those principles are what I tried to implement from literature review, data collection, and data analysis. And as you would note, even in this research question, the principles have been mentioned. And even on Thursday, when we spoke about the purpose statement, those principles were mentioned. So they informed me how to collect data. And when I did that, I found that my study was streamlined. Every stage was streamlined with the purpose statement. And every stage was also streamlined with the central research question. So I could not deviate from those principles, but I don't think I don't see it as a train smash that my questions did not match my research, my sub research questions, because even the other questions that I asked where I had research objectives, where I did not have sub research questions, those were not specifically they were not exactly the objectives that were there. So I have always been deviating, and I've always explored more, because you see, if you check those sub questions, if there are 4, it means I should have only asked 4 questions to my respondents, which I think to me it was going to leave a gap, because I was not going to cover all the principles of organizational design. So as a result, I tried to make sure that I cover all the principles, and as a result, then I had more questions. By the way, my principles were more than 4, so the questions were obviously 4. Some of the principles had at least 2. Some were 1 question, some were 2 questions. So I did not comply with what Creswell and Creswell did. That is why I always say, colleagues, what we read from literature, let's confirm with the study leaders, let's confirm with the college and the principles and the guidelines from the university. Yeah, so that we can know what we're doing is correct. Now, literature, a lot of it is guidelines, and it is dependent on the experience of the researcher, or some of the things that they do is empirical. In terms of this, the reference that I've used here is not from empirical studies, it is a book. But I also do agree that some of the books are a result of empirical studies. So we cannot just throw it away, but the choice depends on the student who will justify and is also advised by the study leader. I want us to continue with this, how we see qualitative research questions. Related to the central question to the specific qualitative strategy. Relate the central question to the specific qualitative strategy of inquiry. This is where I said I did not even go and take the the description and the discussion on the research methods. When I get time, even before we could leave, I will zoom onto it and we will be able to see that it was a qualitative study, and I have used focus groups. I will go and open when time permits, when we've exhausted the slides. But it says here, begin the research questions with the words what or how to convey an open and imaging design. Remember, the same applies to what we said about the purpose statement on Thursday. We said it should be open-ended because it is a qualitative purpose statement. So it should use words that are receptive, that show that we are on the go, because we discover and we build the theories and we generate a lot of themes as we go, because we are using an inductive approach. So here the approach is still the same because it is qualitative. Then we are advised to use what or how to convey an open and imaging design. The word why often implies that the researcher is trying to explain why something occurs. And if we do that, then we suggest the cause and effect thinking that is associated always with quantitative research, and that limits the explanations rather than opening them up for participant views. So we need, in the way that we ask questions, participants should see that, okay, we have got an open-ended room and they can play around in their own accord. We can only guard that they don't deviate away from the study, from the purpose of the study. Because as a researcher, when you're collecting data, you want data that is relative to the study. And how you make sure that data is relative is by asking a correct question. So we are saying here, you ask the correct question, but open-ended. And if they drift away, if your respondents drift away, it is your responsibility to bring them back by probing, by making follow-up, so that they answer exactly what you want. Now, they say again, focus on a single phenomenon or concept. As a study develops over time, factors will emerge that may influence this single phenomenon, but begin a study with a single focus to explore in great detail, as we've done. We said we are exploring, we want to analyze and implement the principles of organizational design. Then it is the principles of organizational design. So that is the phenomenon that we're looking at. And it is this phenomenon that led us to identifying one theory of organizational design. So our discussion and our data collection was actually around that. The entire phenomenon is about the organizations, because we're here studying CMAs, how they are designed. So we are implementing a relevant theory of organizational design. And we often ask, if you want to focus on one phenomenon or concept, what is the one single concept that you want to explore? Remember the other time when we were told about when we start hearing about this research question, we were asked, what is the general or the big phenomenon, the big concept that I want to investigate? Now here they are saying it should be single. What is that single aspect? Now here we have got this question here. Okay, we are going to look at its characteristics now, and this refers to what we've been hearing in the previous slide. Creswell and Creswell did not refer to the word which, but it also does not limit responses. Here, I'm trying to show those words that we were advised to use. We were advised to use what and how. And the very first one, in the first sub question, it starts with which theoretical principles. It does not go. It does not start with a what. It's not saying what theoretical principles. It is asking which. Then I investigated from dictionary if which indeed limits. I know if you say which principles are there, so these people can mention a lot of principles, unlimited, in accordance with their understanding. If there are 3 principles or there are 20 principles, they can mention as many as they can, as long as they justify that these are the principles that I am. This is my understanding and my own interpretation, because Creswell and Creswell did not refer to which, but they referred to what and to how. And I see now the rest of the 3 sub questions start with the what. And the second one says, what is the history of the establishment of CMAs in South Africa, and which legislation laid the foundation of water management? Now, I say the word what does not limit, because this is what was recommended by the other authors, and I do agree with them. What means that you can, what is limited is not limited to one thing. What can be many, can be one, can be hundreds. So here we have used, actually, I've tried to an extent, 80% I tried to comply with their recommendation. Although in earlier sections I did not agree with them. I did not comply with them. And the third one again uses a what. It says, what is the current situation of the CMA and their CEOs in South Africa, with the focus on Nkomati, Suthu, and Brede Horit CMA. So my interpretation and my understanding is the same as the understanding under sub question 2. But the last one, which is the how, the word how opens up the imaging design. It says, how can the organizational structures of CMAs be redesigned? How then is asking for explanations, for somebody to present how he thinks the design could be done in terms of the CMAs. So this indeed is not limiting. It's also opening up for the imaging design. In other words, if there are changes in anything with regard to the data that we collect and with regard to the concepts that we understand, then we would be able to accommodate that. And remember, this is the way in which we can generate new theories. And this is the way in which the themes emerge in data analysis in terms of qualitative research. You see, I again revert back to what we have seen on Thursday in terms of the purpose statement. Look, they say, they continue to emphasize that we need to use exploratory verbs that convey language of imaging design, that not everything is final, because this is inductive. Colleagues, qualitative research use an inductive approach, which is a bottom-up. The didactic one would give you hypothesis, would give you testable hypothesis. It will put theories up front to be tested. So that is deductive, and it is mainly belonging to quantitative research. But here we are advised to always allow exploratory, because qualitative research also explores areas where research has not been done. So exploration. So we must use those words that allow us to even venture into new territories, new areas where research has never been done. Because if we close up, so we will be limited, we're limiting information, and new areas that have not been explored would not be known. Now, I then went back to this central question. I want to see if indeed you agree that this research question does embrace an element of exploration. Because it says, can an analysis and implementation of the principles of organizational studies and organizational design assist CMA and their CEOs to manage their respective water management areas more effectively, so that a better service can be rendered to water users? And here, my interesting keywords that I'm interested on are these action statements. Can an analysis, because we are told, we are advised to be exploratory, to use exploratory language. I want to understand from your side, and I'm going to pause here so that when we move, we actually are together. Can an analysis and implementation, is analysis indeed related to exploration? But even before I can pause, I did on my own looked at dictionary and noted that explore or exploration has to do with the uncovering of unexpected trends. And analysis refers to studying something closely. I analyze things, different parts. And here I remember in data analysis, in qualitative research, particularly, themes emerge during data analysis. So exploration is a strategy to allow, actually the use of exploratory statements or words is a strategy to allow themes or aspects that should emerge during the implementation of qualitative research design. So if analysis has to do with something that has to emerge during data analysis. So I agreed that actually the statement, the question here is actually not closing, is always opening up. And therefore I agree with this one. And if you don't mind, let me pause a little bit. And if there's no comments, I'll quickly move. But I just wanted not to move away before we actually can verify and agree that these words are really exploratory. And when we look at this one, let's also look at the previous words, how and what. And if we do agree that these are open, they are not closed words, and they allow us to accept emerging trends in the execution of the research project. Expect the research questions to evolve and change during the study in a manner consistent with the assumption of an imaging design. Colleagues, this is an overemphasis, it's a repetition, it's actually something that is cautioning. Please always accept changing circumstances during research, because qualitative research is not rigid, it is flexible. That is why it is also based on different assumptions than quantitative studies. Often quantitative studies, often in quantitative studies, the questions are under continual review and formulation, as in grounded theory. In other words, you don't ask a question and you think it is rigid, because you must remember you are still going to accept responses and in a flexible way from sources of the information. So it is whether that is from literature or whether it is from the informants, the respondents, the population from where data is collected. So they can lead to you reformulating some of the questions and changing the study design. This approach may be problematic for individuals accustomed to quantitative designs in which the research questions remain fixed and never change throughout the study, and your hypothesis would be there, would be static, because this is what you're testing. Your study is about a section that is testing a specific hypothesis, the relationship between specific variables. If you've got 3 hypotheses, so you've got 3 tests, and those stand from the beginning of the study to the end. Later on, you would see that they even advise that your hypothesis should be stated up front so that they inform and they shape the study as we continue. So in that way, you don't have flexibility. But in qualitative study, you have got flexibility in that your research questions can be revised from time to time to accommodate emerging designs. They continue to emphasize use open-ended questions without reference to the literature or theory unless otherwise indicated by a qualitative strategy of inquiry. I have while I was stating the general or the central question, I have made reference to the theory because I mentioned the principles of the theory of organizational design and organizational studies. So I don't know if here they specifically refer to sub-questions, because even in sub-question number 1, I made reference to the theory. But here they give room also. They say, unless otherwise, if it is indicated by a qualitative strategy of inquiry. Specify the participants and the research site for the study if the information has not yet been given. Now, here is another matter, because we've got a specific area, the section on research methodology, that provides us an opportunity to indicate where the study is going to be implemented, who are going to be the informants, what is the population, the participants, and the research site. We can specify under the research methodology. But sometimes even the study sites can be part and parcel of chapter 1, independent of the research methodology. I'm going to enter into quantitative research questions and hypotheses. And before I do that, I want to pause a little bit so that if there is any closing question or any closing comment on qualitative research questions, we can deal with that. And even just before we could move to a new section on quantitative research questions and hypotheses. This is part 2 of our workshop today. There is a big question here. What is a research question? So here we are now discussing under quantitative research questions. We have just closed qualitative research questions. And the understanding of the authors is that you would pose different questions differently under quantitative and qualitative study. We have seen, we were advised to write our purpose statement differently from qualitative studies to quantitative studies. So the same applies here. And here, the statements that follows is based on Guel, whose literature did not have a date. Now, we're asking a question what a research question is, and we can answer, it can be answered in this fashion. A research question is a carefully worded question that addresses an aspect or concept of a hypothesis. There it is. It is a key element of a research study because it defines the main purpose or direction of the study. A researcher may have a clear idea of the main theme of the research, but defining this idea in terms of a testable research question is an essential part of the research process. And in this presentation, I do not have an example of a research question, but what I have are the research hypotheses, and we will use those to try and understand how we approach quantitative research. Quantitative research questions usually explore relationships between variables in a research study. This also applies in terms of the hypothesis because they explore relationships between variables in a research study. However, they may also address the magnitude of a single variable, as in what is the level of participation of college youth in the specific B awareness campaign, where the focus is not exploring relationships. Instead, it centers on finding out the magnitude of a single variable. You see now, participation in campaign. Now you see now the difference between qualitative research. Qualitative research wants to explore, so to dig deep and explore those areas where the areas that have not been ventured. But now this one and this question instead centers on finding out the magnitude of a single variable, which is the participation in the campaign. This is just an example that they're presenting to us. Research questions should focus on the following. What are you trying to find through this research? What are the questions for which you seek answers? What is the geographic area for the research? Where will you draw your sample from? What is the time frame for your research? And when we dealt with the purpose statement, it was clear from the beginning that we were told that those must indicate where data will be collected, must also indicate the methodology and the area, in other words. The answers to the above will help you frame your research question. For an example, what is the extent of burnout amongst counselors involved in HIV counseling in Pretoria? This focuses on magnitude of burnout amongst counselors. Do supervisory practices help counselors involved in HIV counseling in Pretoria cope with burnout? This deals with understanding the relationship between supervisory practices and coping capacities of counselors. You will see these things will be repeated when we go to hypothesis. So these questions postulate a relationship. They say, do supervisory practices help counselors involved in HIV counseling cope with the burnout? we want to understand if the supervisory practices do relate to the coping with burnout by counselors of HIV. So if we've got supervisory practices, or in other words, if they are being supervised, are they better coping with the burnout? So in other words, they can only, are we saying they can only cope with the burnout if they are better supervised, or if they are barely supervised, or if there's just a strategy for supervision, if they know that I'm being supervised, so there's somebody to who I can fall on when I get tired. So is this one way in which they can be assisted in coping with the burnout? This deals with understanding their relationship between supervisory practices and the coping capacities of counselors. So this has to do with the relationship, as we have said, because this is quantitative. Researchers do not simply make up research questions, but rather they identify research questions from a number of different sources. And some of the sources are practical experience, where if a person is working under a specific organization, that practical experience could give them an opportunity to pose questions on things that they work with, some other things that they do not understand, and some other things which they think are not solved. So that can be a source of generating questions. For an example, an engineer under the Department of Water and Sanitation might decide to study the impact of tropical heat on the lifespan of galvanized pipes. My apology, I just deleted pipes here because here the person who is working with in the Department of Water and Sanitation, they deal with infrastructure, and part of the infrastructure are the pipes. The old pipes were galvanized, and the galvanized pipes used to get rusted, and they got destroyed and damaged very fast. So he might want to look at the impact of the heat. There might be other factors that impact on the lifespan of the galvanized pipe. But this time he wants to understand, does heat also have an impact? Because it is very hot in South Africa because of the tropical temperatures. Alternatively, another social worker working on a vocational training program may want to check if the program was successful in ensuring that the trained youth found employment. So this is just an indication that people from different disciplines might gather different experiences, and dependent on their experiences. So the aspects that they might want to investigate that might lead to a research question might also differ. So a social worker will ask a question related to the responsibility of social working. Now, here, it was the case of the youth that has been trained. Now, the program of working during vacation or the vocational training program, does it impact on them getting employment? That is how he can decide. So we see that it differs from the question that one of the engineer might ask if he's working with the pipes. Now, literature review is also another area where one can identify questions to ask. And these questions, when they're asked, remember we're saying they lead to researching, because our questions, if are coming from a literature review, our literature review might be done because we have identified a specific research topic that we want to investigate. So we can use our literature as a way of generating research questions that would even assist us to actually investigate a specific topic. I just want to find out, yes, there is a slide that I've brought in here as an example. There is a literature on departmentalization, and this actually does not come from quantitative study. It comes from qualitative study. I just did not get a handle on a quantitative literature that has led to the research question. I couldn't have time to invest, but I wanted to use this part of literature, which is part of the principles that we made reference to on several occasions. These principles were mentioned under the research question. And when we review the literature, we found that these principles are there. Now, in other words, they can lead if we have not read any other literature and we're reading them, or even in a combination with other literature, we might find that questions might emerge while we're reading them. Remember, the other time we said, we noted that actually, I must read this one because I think the reason why I put it in here, it has got relevance to some of the, it's either the statement of problem or the research question. It says departmentalization is a process in which the activities and services of an organization are grouped together in a logical and systematic manner in order for such an organization to deliver sound services to its stakeholders. Similar functions should be grouped together in the same organizational entities in order to ensure the services are focused and delivered effectively. Oh, here, I just want to indicate the linkage between the research question and the literature, because here our discussion is that research questions can also be generated from literature that we read. And the following one, I think, should indicate that specific questions were asked in relation to the discussion in literature. So the discussion was about departmentalization. So when we went to the research questions, and the specific ones in particular when we were collecting data, the researcher compiled the following questions on the organizational design principle of departmentalization. So having read the literature, so these questions emerged. Are the functions allocated to the different organizational entities responsible for the management of water to various water management areas correctly allocated? I think in the past, I also made reference to this question. So this is just a linkage between literature and questioning, which is stated there. So this, I said, my apology, that this relates to a qualitative study. But even in the quantitative study, you might have read a theory. Even in quantitative studies, remember, you test the theories, and the literature would be the same. The only difference would be the methodology, the approach, and the objective of the study, as well as the purpose. But literature will be the same, and the same literature can assist one to actually generate a question. That question, instead of generating it in a qualitative way, is going to be generated and be formulated in a quantitative way. We will use those verbs that are closed-ended, because it would be in a quantitative study, as opposed to in a qualitative study where we would use open-ended verbs. Questions are varied and they are different. We have got questions that are descriptive. We have got questions that are exploratory. We have got questions that are explanatory. And here we have got elements of good questions, which I'm not going to go through because I want to rush now to hypothesis. And let me pause a little bit. I brushed through because there wasn't a lot of examples that I presented. I just presented but one. But if there are questions, then I think I'm open now so that we can have a discussion even before we can tackle the hypothesis.
There's a question on the chat from
Yes.
Makatu, Johannes,
Yes.
asking about the difference between an interview guide and a questionnaire.
Okay. In an interview guide, I think did we not touch it last week? Okay, but let's continue. In an interview guide, you have got open-ended questions. You've got unstructured. Your questions are not rigid, and you prepare an interview guide where you want to conduct unstructured interviews. Yeah, there mainly in qualitative studies, you would have an interview guide, and that is where you would use open-ended verbs that allow exploration. They allow your respondents to answer in their own way. So they are going to lead you. You will ask the first question, which is open-ended. But when they answer, then they lead you to indicate to you where you must probe, where you must ask more, because the flow of the discussion should mainly be based on what the the respondents are saying. So in other words, you need to avoid leading questions. You unstructure your questions, open-ended. This is mainly for unstructured interviews. But where you use a questionnaire, you are going to have a structured way of collecting data. And here, if it is interviews, it is the structured interviews. So you have got rigid questions that are going to be asked. The question that you have asked to the first respondent, it must be asked as it is to the second respondent. And there, sometimes you even have a choice or multiple choice. Somebody can only choose from 3 questions. Do you eat a donkey or you don't eat a donkey? I eat a donkey when there is no food. No, I don't eat a donkey. Sometimes I can eat a donkey. So you only choose from those. That is in structured, and that is where a questionnaire is useful. A questionnaire might sometimes, it also depends on the type of the design that you are doing. A questionnaire might also have open-ended and close-ended questions, where you have when you have embedded designs. With embedded designs, you collect data, qualitative data and quantitative data at the same time. So you can have your and your close-ended questions. Your questionnaire can have that. But under structured interviews, then it's not a mixed method. You see, the embedded designs belong to mixed methods. Then you are mixing quantitative and qualitative. So you would have both open-ended and closed-ended questions in one data collection instrument, which is a questionnaire. But otherwise, if it is only quantitative, then it is that quantitative instrument that does not allow flexibility, that does not have a open-ended questions, and your respondents do not answer as they wish. They only answer in accordance with how you are asking questions. Okay. Now we are moving to a very complex and a very difficult discussion now. Let's see how we deal with it now. We're going to deal now with the hypothesis. And what is a hypothesis? And in plural form there, you can see they write it with E's instead of an I. One is a hypothesis, but plural form are hypotheses. I cannot sound English-wise, but I will sound Chivenda. But you see, in writing, I will use different spellings. And these are statements that explain the relationship between 2 or more variables. These statements are tested during a research study, and the period relationship can be, and the predicted relationship can be proved to be either valid or invalid within the framework or particular context of the study. It is important to note that hypothesis is validated or proved to be invalid within the specific time frame of the study. In other words, the study is conducted within a specific time frame. That is the time frame within which a researcher is given to validate or to actually invalidate the hypothesis. So the hypothesis is being tested. A hypothesis can be regarded as the proposed or tentative answer to a research question. And you will see, I will present examples here, as in this slide, to show how this learner researcher has structured her hypothesis. I actually used this because this is what I commented on and I've guided on. And we have seen that the researcher has even got a good percentage, which means that even her department, this is a science department, and I think she belongs to the natural sciences, they've accepted this hypothesis. So we have presented them here so we can see how they are awarded. And we are saying that they then present relationships between 2 variables, which is an independent and a dependent variable. And I think we have used this slide in the past, and I'm going to read the first hypothesis, which says drying will reduce the phytochemical present in the final product as compared to when sample is raw. The researcher here collected the samples or collected leaves that she is going to test in laboratory experiments. She wants to dry the leaves of a specific plant. When those leaves are dry, she's saying the drying method is going to have an impact on the nutritional values contained in the plant leaves as opposed to the original leaves. In the controlled leaves, in the controlled specimens, she has got leaves that are not going to be dried. She takes samples, she tests and finds that, oh, there is this quantity of carbohydrate. The leaves also have this quantity of fat, or it has got this quantity of protein before it is dried, either in an oven or when deep freezed. Now, she is saying when she deep freezes, there's going to be changes in the values of the nutrients. Then, in other words, she expects to see a different results when she tests than if she has tested raw and dried leaves. She took leaves, she tested, she found the specific values of the nutrients. She takes the leaves, she dries them. Through the oven, she dries them, and through the freeze, she deep freezes them. Then thereafter, she takes the deep freezed leaves, she goes and tests to find out how much protein is there, how much carbohydrate is there, or how much fat is there. Then she is postulating a relationship that drying will lead to the changes in the values of the nutrients, the carbohydrates, the fats which are in the leaves. Now she wants to do this by deep freezing and also by oven drying. So the relationship is there between the nutrients and the drying methods. So the drying methods in this case is an independent variable, and the dependent variable are the nutrients. Now I say here as my comment, relationship between drying and phytochemical. Here, phytochemicals are not nutrients. They are chemicals that are found in the leaves. But she also is going to try to test that. She will dry and test. She will also not dry, but test. She will dry, deep freeze, and also test. So she wants to see what is the difference. The second comment that I make, I say relationship between drying methods and nutritional value. In other words, she says there will be changes. This is what I was saying. The use of the word will indicate that the hypotheses are tentative and yet to be tested. The previous slide says a hypothesis is actually a tentative statement. It's not saying that it is a truth. It is actually a projection, it's a postulation, it's a guess, scientific guess that we think that when we have dried these leaves, their nutritional value will actually change. That guess is allowed, and in scientific terms, it is referred to as a hypothesis. For an example, if the researcher question is, do supervisory practices help counselors involved in HIV counseling in Pretoria cope with burnout? The hypothesis could be supervisory practices. Oh, we have already said that in the previous statements. Supervisory practices assisting in reducing burnout. No. It is a full hypothesis statement. Supervisory practices assist in producing burnout amongst counselors involved in HIV counseling in Pretoria. That is a hypothesis. So we are saying that the practices would indeed help the counselors to cope with the burnout. We have already said this in the previous one. The reducing a problem to a hypothesis format makes it possible scientifically solve the problem. In quantitative studies, a hypothesis is usually stated in advance of the study, and then it is tested during the study. I will later on revert back to the drying method and leave this HIV thing because I do not have a sample a good sample from it. I will want to continue with those hypotheses. Now, this hypothesis, now the previous slide says that hypothesis should be stated upfront at the beginning of the research, so that as one continues to conduct research, you are actually giving effect to the hypothesis, or you are being guided with the hypothesis. And as you find results, and you analyze, you interpret, you do everything, then you are actually testing the hypothesis. Then eventually you are going to find if the testing has resulted in the hypothesis being rejected or not being rejected. So this is the reason why they recommend that this hypothesis is written up front. Now here I've indicated that these hypotheses were all under point 2.2, which is actually at the beginning of the study, because the beginning of the study only has one as aim and objectives of the study. 1.2 is objectives. 2 includes the statement of problem, research questions, and the hypothesis. So they are number 2. They're up there at the beginning of the study, so that wherever one continues in each of the stages, then the researcher will be able to give effect to all these hypotheses. Stating hypothesis in advance helps researchers to keep the study focused on and also helps them interpret the results of a study against an established framework. So your hypothesis would have made tentative projection of the outcomes. So when you're collecting data, it's either the data is confirming or it is refuting. That is the way in which you're testing the hypothesis. A hypothesis is formulated based on existing knowledge, and by the process of being tested during a research study, serves as a tool to advance knowledge on a particular subject. Remember, this existing knowledge is contained in literature, and if we continue to collect data and we find that the data is refuting or it actually is confirming or validating the hypothesis, then that is also taken as a way in which knowledge is being advanced. Because the fact that the hypothesis is found to be false does not mean that knowledge has not been gained. It has been gained. We will hear this later on. Oh, yes, the next statement says, even if a given hypothesis is proved to be false during a study, the result is regarded as an advancement of knowledge, because we know now that within the context of the study, the stated variables do or do not share a relationship. Remember, the hypothesis can either be null or can be an alternative hypothesis which project a positive relationship. The other one will project tentatively a negative relationship. So if we say something is negative and we go and prove that it is positive, then it means that we have learned something. That is contribution to the body of knowledge. The same applies if we say something is negative and we go and prove that it is positive, then that is also contribution to the body of knowledge. This knowledge is useful to other researchers who may want to test that relationship in other contexts. Hypotheses are usually derived from theory and may be based on already conducted research on the subject. Thus, the development of a hypothesis is closely linked to the literature review conducted for the study. For an example, in a study for child labor, the research question could be, what is the link between dropout rates in primary school and children being involved in labor? And the hypothesis could read as dropout rates in primary schools increase, the rate of child labor among 6 to 10 years old children also increase. I will have better examples that are based on the hypothesis that I took from the scientific study. Here it is now. Here we want to confirm the point that previous studies actually influence the generation of hypothesis. Because the previous slide just said that hypothesis might be generated from a theory, but also it can be generated from literature and from previous studies. So this is the example of what has happened in the previous study. I'm going to read this one. Previous studies on Obelia tenax, this is the plant where leaves have been collected, where the leaves were sampled. Now, previous studies on Obelia tenax focused on distribution of elements within the plant. Its ethnobotany. Now, Matlangeni and others also looked at the nutritional value, antioxidant, and antibiotic properties of Nestle, including Obesia tenax, to analyze the impact of cooking. Now, the researcher here, instead of analyzing the impact of cooking, she wants to analyze the impact of drying through oven method and through deep freezing method. Now, in other words, she noted that in the previous studies, the investigation was about the impact of cooking. Now, then this is a gap that she identified. So she says, okay, I did not see drying as one of the ways that were investigated. So I can put my hypothesis on that so that my study can continue to investigate the relationship between the nutrients and those methods for drying the leaves. So in that way, literature has indicated to her that only other aspects have been analyzed, such as the antibiotic properties of nettles and the impact of cooking on some of these properties. These are the nutritional value, antioxidant, and antibiotic properties. So the study was about cooking. If cooking does have impact on those properties. So because this was not done, so literature is telling her that no, your methods, the drying methods, have not been done. Then she posed a hypothesis based on that. Then she says, to the best of our knowledge, there is no research that has focused on the impact of drying on the phytochemicals and nutritional composition of Obesia tenax. And remember, her hypotheses are focusing on phytochemicals and nutritional values of Obesia tenax. This research proposes a way to further understand the nutritional and phytochemical aspects of this indigenous plant as one of the less known wild edible vegetables after exposure to different drying methods. After exposure to different drying methods, as well as to how it can be preserved and used in new product development for nutritious food products. That is why one of the hypotheses does say something about the lifespan of these plants if it has been properly processed. So drying is one method of processing food so that it can better be preserved, so that it does not get spoiled. It can be used either as soup, it can be used either as spices to add into the food. So the drying methods are to test that one. But the important aspect is, after we've dried it, is the nutritional value still there? If there is enough carbon, if there is enough protein or carbohydrate or fat, do these leaves lose the nutrition? Do they lose carbohydrate, fat, or protein? Or they gain more after drying? So we are interested in that because this is edible things and we want to ensure that there is food security. So this experiment is going to result in a recommendation that says that the drying method would not have a negative impact, or it would have a negative impact on the plant. Therefore, we must use the method or we must not use it, because we've got deep freezing and we've got oven drying. Which one is better and which one has got negative impacts on the nutritional value? That if people are eating, there is going to be deficiency in nutrients, or if people are eating, the leaves will still be rich in nutrients in the form of soup or in the form of spices. So this is the reason for all these hypotheses that have been presented there. And she's going to test this. Let me stop here. And I've just said this is a complex discussion. I want to stop so that we can have a discussion and we can look. And we are left with 17 minutes. To the end of the workshop, but I will try to cover as much as possible with regard to hypothesis, so that as we knock off, I I shall have touched a number of examples that I have. Any question? Any comment? And I know we did make comments and questions were posed with regard to hypothesis last week. We spoke about the independent variable and the dependent variable.
Thank you, Dr. Korombi. In fact, I'm from qualitative, but then what I wanted to maybe ask my question, obviously now, is with regards to whether this hypothesis it is only drawn on quantitative, or it can apply qualitatively and also on mixed method. Yes, thank you.
Yes. In mixed method, it can, particularly in mixed methods. I read about it, and there is a presentation. Unfortunately, we will not be able to look at it today, but we can look at it the other day, where there is imaging discussion. In the past, researchers did not focus on the generation of hypothesis or the use of hypothesis in mixed methods, but they are saying there is imaging discussions, and people are talking about it as an important aspect. And I've got slides that indicate how quantitative questions should be asked and how qualitative questions should be asked to also embrace hypothesis element and as an advice to the researchers. But apart from that is by Cresswell and Cresswell. But I did read, I think, is it Guel? There's somebody, man. It's either Guel or somebody else that I read yesterday. I found one statement in one paragraph that says, that talks about hypothesis in qualitative research. They say, apart from the fact that hypothesis can be tested in qualitative research, it can also be generated through qualitative research. I do not have experience on that because I've never tested a hypothesis and I've never used qualitative study to test or to generate a qualitative a hypothesis. But we can do a lot of investigations, and we can sometimes even call other people who have got experience on this, so they can share their experience and discussions. And if there's a specific person who is interested on conducting quantitative research using hypothesis. But in qualitative, I've never used it, but while I was finalizing my research on this presentation, I did note that they say it can be utilized. So I don't know how it is utilized, but what I can agree with is that during the conducting of qualitative research, the results, the finding, you can end up at developing a hypothesis, or you can end up at developing a theory. Remember, we said a conceptual framework can lead to the development of a theory. Grounded theory is the one that can also assist us in generating theory. And here they're saying qualitative study can also lead to the generation of hypothesis. But they also said it can be tested. I want to do a lot of research on that one.
A quick one. Does it then mean that is it statistical?
It is, yeah, it is statistical. But you know, in this this experiment that this researcher is conducting, I think it's eventually going to be statistical, because she's going to find out how the nutrients, such as your protein, such as your carbohydrates, such as your fiber, have been affected. So she has to quantify this. I think she has to do statistical analysis. She has got to quantify it statistically to indicate, oh, at the beginning, when under controlled, the leaves that were not subjected to burning or to freezing, they've got this much. But let us calculate how much has been lost. That is a statistical calculation. According to me, I don't know statistics, but I tell you, this is going to be quantitative calculation. So we eventually have to subject the analysis into statistical analysis. Any other comment? And please do, the people that are doing quantitative research, please, the scientists, those that belong to scientific disciplines, this is your domain, and you don't do research if you don't have a hypothesis. And your research questions are quantitative, all of them.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, colleagues. Good evening, Prof.
Yes.
I think Monami has actually tried to cover me as well. I had the same question because as far as I was trying to understand the example or the illustration that you were giving us, it was more, I don't know if I thought maybe we're moving at a social science thing. So now if you are saying we're going to do something that has to do, like as we go with the research, we're going to be exposed to statistics. So now my question comes in, because that's my area of study. So so now are we going to be exposed in, because what happens is, like, when you're doing statistical analysis, I understand there are two, that there is advanced and there is also a thing. So my question is, are we going to be exposed to the advanced one, or are we going to be exposed to the basic that is generic? Well, no, like you just said, you thrown around a few numbers there and you said, but are we going to see ourselves doing Sarima models and other stuff, or is just gonna be basic statistics? And then if ever one needs to go deeper, then how can one approach that? Like, what dimension, and is there any way you'll be able to assist in terms of guiding that when you get here, these are the two parts, this is part A, part B. Now when you are doing quantitative analysis, now this is where you differ with social science, you differ with those that are in the field of applied mathematics or statistics. Okay.
All right. We will not.
I'm clear.
No, I'm not. I'm not competent in statistics, and my specialty is in my interest actually is on qualitative research. Here, you know why I'm doing these things. In research, you, even in social science, you must remember people do quantitative study. So I deliberately actually have included hypothesis here. Now, mainly to show that qualitative study differs from quantitative study. And I know that some of you are quantitative students. So okay, for an example, I'm going to make reference to mixed methods. And in mixed methods, I've got a very good example of the study that I undertook. And when I present it, I always protect myself. I put a disclaimer that the work that I'm presenting was not subjected to rigorous statistics, because it was calculated by a calculator, and it was for the purpose of completing the study. So the study was never even subjected to statistics, although it was mixed methods. So I'm not going to run away from mixed methods or mentioning quantitative research, because you see, I would be giving half. And I know that if there is need for all those areas, we will bring an expert here. I've got an agreement with the center, with UNISA, that when there are people who definitely need something on quantitative, they must mention that in specific terms. Then we arrange and we bring a guru on that, and they deal with that one. But here, I'm just making reference. I will not deal with statistics. You see, as we continue, hypotheses usually include the independent variable, the dependent variable, the predicted outcomes, and the population of the study. In the above example, then about the dropout, they indicate that, but I want to bring those hypotheses that I presented earlier on, and I want to examine and see the characteristics, if they have some of those elements that have been indicated above. Here, they say they should have independent variable and dependent variable, and we identify drying methods as independent variables. And this is what I want us to discuss, to say, yes, they are independent variables or they are not, or this hypothesis does not have all the characteristics. It lacks one or it only has one. That is what I want to hear from yourselves so that we can make the discussion fruitful. Or you have got different experience and we can continue to enrich on that one. Reduction of phytochemicals is the predicted outcome because it's saying drying will reduce. Now, that is what we expect drying to do. So it will lead to a specific outcome. And that outcome is the reduction of phytochemicals in the predicted, the reduction of phytochemicals. So this is what is predicted. And what are phytochemicals? These are dependent variables because their change is mainly dependent on the drying method. If the drying method is not there, there would be no changes in these phytochemicals. So the same would apply to other variables, such as the nutritional values, whether it is carbohydrate, whether it is protein. They will never be reduced in value, or they would not experience changes in value if there is no drying methods. So they are dependent on the independent variable, which is the drying methods. Then there is some indication of different types of hypotheses. Some have got positive, some hypotheses usually indicate the direction of the relationship between the independent and dependent variable. So these relationships are usually presented as below. There is a positive one and there is a negative association. Now, a positive association would say two or more variables are said to be positively associated when they change in the same direction as each other. Thus, if one variable increases, the other also increases, or if the other decreases, the other also decreases. So it means they've got a positive association. For an example, the higher intensity of heat from the oven, the higher the intensity of the heat from the oven, then if it leads to more changes experienced in the nutritional value of the samples, it means this hypothesis then proposes a positive association between the two variables. There is the heat there, which is on higher intensity, and the changes that are experienced in the nutritional value. If the other one is more, the other one also is more. But it is different if they've got negative association. It means they do not move in the same direction. Okay, let's look here as for an example. For an example, the lower the temperature in the deep freeze, which is the independent variable, then the higher changes are experienced in nutritional values, such as starch or protein of the samples. Now, here, this is a negative association. So when you deep freeze, now the hypothesis says, when you deep freeze, you want to have more, you want, when you deep freeze, you will not reduce. Sorry, in other words, when you deep freeze, you've got low temperatures. Then if you have higher changes in the nutritional values, it means your temperature, the lower temperature is not reducing changes. Therefore, the changes are not in accordance with the behavior of an independent variable. So the dependent variable behaves differently by experiencing higher changes. Instead of the change is being lowered because the temperature is low, then the change is in opposite. So this is what they refer to as a negative association, in that they don't all move towards lower or towards higher. When the other one is going down, the other one is going high. And I'm going to I'm going to stop here, unfortunately. I see that we are already at 7:30, and let us have the final bite and the final discussion about this, the comments and some of the questions and some recommendations of moving forward with this. Let me go to the chat because I saw some things written there. Anybody with a comment or here? The College of Graduate. Yes. Conducts a series of workshops on data analysis tools such as let me. This is all that I could see. Let me see. Hypothesis testing. If one has quasi-independent variables, how does one deal with this? Since it is not true, can deal with it future. Researchers, you are welcome to request specific topics at any time. Anything that has to do with quasi experiment, I have to study if I have to answer, but I am comfortable to bring someone who said not only answer this one, who will deal with the full workshop on it, so that a lot of questions are answered. What is the difference between interview guide and this one is previous one? Okay. Now it's fine. Don't you have any other comment or any other question? And if you want to recommend, I strongly say, if you feel that you want a quantitative presentation on hypothesis and on statistical analysis, it's fine. I think we should bring specialists on that one.
I'm the one who put that question on the quasi experiment. Okay. I'm busy with my research, and it's based on water analysis in a river. Okay, so I'm not looking for any correlation between variables, but more in terms of determining the level of contamination. Okay, as exploratory research.
Exploratory
research. So I wanted to know more about, because I don't have any correlation, and the sample size required for a quasi experiment is huge. Okay, but because it's an exploratory, will that reduce the number of samples required?
No, I think I'm not sure. I don't know how you're going to collect your samples, but what I know is that you are going to identify a number of points where to collect your and remember, you want to collect for different variables. Let us know the variables that you're gonna, the indicators that you're gonna collect. Then that should be something that should dependent the number of samples that you do, because you need your sample where you want to analyze ion, where you want to analyze coliform or E. coli, something like that. You are going to have different samples. So can your variables not be the ones to determine what samples you're going to collect?
Yes, you see, in terms of the water samples, I'm going to test for monoaromatic hydrocarbons in the water, right? Yes. So there are water parameters that will influence your values detected. Okay, so I'm testing for those. I'm going to test for those in any case. Okay,
Yeah.
you get a full-blown analysis, and you understand. But in terms of the sample size that is required,
Yes.
the simple calculation shows that you need 380 samples.
Is it?
Yeah.
Sure. It's
So,
not,
and at a cost of around 2,500 rand per sample, that's enormous cost.
it's too much money.
So,
Are you not doing it under an organization?
No, I'm private. I'm going to do it to UNISA
Yes.
laboratories.
No,
So
I think
I've researched some stuffs, but I'm not sure whether I'm on the right track. But in terms of a quasi experiment, okay, and because it's exploratory, the number of samples required can be reduced tremendously. So I've reduced the samples to around 48.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. I need to have some sort of reference for that.
Yes.
Right? I've read it somewhere, and I can't get a reference for that. So, that maybe you can know of something in that line that we can speed up and look at that.
Do you have access to the? Did you try the Water Research Commission website?
Yes.
And you don't find some reference on that?
No.
Also try the CSIR.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yes, I don't know much about NRF if they also conduct water quality tests, but CSIR and Water Research Commission, I think would be the possible ones that I know, because they, particularly the Water Research Commission, would specialize on that, but CSIR would also conduct tests on water quality.
Okay. Because at the moment I'm actually stuck. I needed to do I handed in my research report without data analysis.
Yes.
So that is not the right way of doing it. But I had endless difficulty with the School of Engineering.
Yes.
In terms of not giving me access to and feedback from my research.
I can also, if you send me an email, if you see my email, send me an email. I will link you up with the Center for Water Quality Studies at Roodeplaat. It's an entity of the Department of Water and Sanitation. I will also link you up with the Chief Director, Water Resource Management, who is also in charge of that institute. They are at head office in Water and Sanitation. I think they would advise more on this one. Apart from Water Research Commission, I can also give you contacts, details for the other research managers at the Water Research Commission.
Okay, that would be helpful. I don't see your email on this chat. Could you just have them populate?
I'm going to write my email now.
Okay, and I will take it from there and send you an email.
Thank you very much.
Do you want my research report to read through?
Yes, it's fine. It's fine.
Okay, I'll do that. Because I only got a supervisor on the day I had to hand in my research report.
Okay. I've just shared my email address.
Okay, thanks. I will send you it in a few minutes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and good night.